Imagine waking up in bed next to your sister, completely naked, covered in blood, while the police break down your bedroom door. Downstairs, two mutilated and unrecognizable bodies lie in pools of blood. The victim's eyes have been torn out with bare hands, and when the police ask what happened, you simply confess, "It was us." This is the terrifying true story of Christine and Leah Papin, two sisters who in February 1933 committed one of the most shocking murders in French history. Sit back and enjoy the story we are about to tell. It has a surprising ending. But first, please subscribe to the channel to enjoy more little-known and under-investigated crimes. The lives of the Papin sisters began immersed in tragedy and abandonment. Their parents, Clémence Duret and Gustave Papin, had a broken marriage long before they had children. Rumors of infidelity followed Clémence throughout the city of Le Mans, and although Gustave knew about the gossip, the couple married when she became pregnant with Emilia in 1902. Gustave's resentment grew every day. He wanted to start over somewhere else, far from the rumors, but Clémence firmly refused to leave Le Mans, even threatening to take her own life if she were forced to move. In 1905, Christine, the couple's second daughter, was born. However, unable to care for another child, they sent the baby to live with Gustave's relatives. For 6 long years, Christine grew up in a peaceful and loving environment, unaware of the horrors taking place in her biological parents' home. The youngest, Leah, was born in 1911. Shortly afterward, the marriage completely collapsed. When Emilia was about 10 years old, devastating accusations emerged. Gustave was alleged to have sexually abused his own daughter. But instead of protecting the girl, Clémence reacted in a disturbing way. She became jealous, as if Emilia had seduced her father. The punishment was cruel. Emilia was sent to the Catholic orphanage Bon Pasteur, known for its strict discipline. Christine was taken from the loving home where she lived and sent there as well. When the uncle who cared for Leah passed away, she joined her sisters at the orphanage. At that time, thousands of French children were abandoned in similar institutions. Some cities even had up to 20% of newborns living in orphanages. Clémence, however, did not intend to leave her daughters there forever. Her plan was dark. She would wait until they were old enough to work and begin sending money to her. When Emilia and Christine expressed interest in becoming nuns, Clémence panicked. That would mean losing her source of income. She quickly removed Christine and Leah from the orphanage, but Emilia had already taken her vows and remained in the convent, disappearing from her sister's story. At the age of 15, each of the girls was placed by Clémence to work as a domestic servant. Christine was described as a tireless worker, but stubborn. Leah, on the other hand, was extremely submissive, quiet, and introverted. Whenever possible, the sisters begged to work together so they could keep each other company. Despite having grown up apart, Christine and Leah developed an extraordinarily strong bond. With a troubled mother and unstable work environments, they were the only constant in each other's lives. Their work was impeccable, but Clémence constantly moved them from job to job, seeking higher wages to pocket for herself. In 1926, the sisters secured a well-paid position that they kept for years. It began promisingly, but would end in blood and horror. Christine was hired by the Lancelin family as a domestic servant. Mr. René Lancelin was a retired lawyer who lived with his wife Leonie and their youngest daughter Geneviève in an elegant residence on Rue Brière near Paris. After 6 months of exemplary service, Christine convinced the Lancelins to hire Leah as well. At first, everything seemed perfect. The sisters received fair wages, ate the same food as the family, and slept in a decent room with 2 beds, a heater, and a balcony. The Lancelins took pride in their devoted maids who were envied by other wealthy families. Having never had a present mother figure, Christine and Leah grew attached to Madame Lancelin, affectionately calling her Mom, while Clémence was merely that woman. Leonie even contacted Clémence to say that from then on, the girls would keep their own wages. It could have been a happy new beginning. For a while, it was. But in 1932, something changed drastically. Leonie fell into deep depression, and her personality transformed completely. The warm, maternal woman became cold and distant, communicating only through notes. She began inspecting the maid's work with obsessive rigor, using white gloves to check surfaces. Criticism turned into shouting. Shouting turned into physical abuse. The maternal figure the girls loved so much now beat them if the work was not perfect.
For Christine and Leah, who already carried deep scars from a violent childhood, it was only a matter of time before something exploded. Whenever circumstances allowed, the young women pleaded to be employed in the same household, enabling them to enjoy each other's company during their leisure hours. Despite having been raised separately during their formative years, Christine and Leah quickly forged an exceptionally intense sisterly bond. With a deeply troubled maternal figure and constantly changing work environments, the sisters represented the only source of stability and consistency in each other's lives. The quality of the service provided by the young women was absolutely irreproachable and frequently praised by their employers. Nevertheless, they constantly moved between different positions, as Clemence perpetually sought opportunities offering higher remuneration, from which she could appropriate a portion for herself. In 1926, the Papin sisters managed to secure an exceptionally well-paid position, which they would retain for several consecutive years. Although this arrangement began in an extremely promising manner, it would eventually culminate in the violent and bloody death of their employers. That same year, Christine was hired to perform domestic duties for the Lancelin family, who resided at number 6 on Rue Bruyère. Mr. René Lancelin was a retired legal professional who lived with his wife, Madame Léonie Lancelin, and the couple's youngest daughter, Geneviève, in a spacious semi-detached residence located near the heart of Paris. Christine quickly realized that the Lancelins possessed ample financial resources to support multiple domestic servants. After demonstrating 6 months of absolutely impeccable service, she persuaded her employers to also hire Leah to work in the same household. The sisters initially flourished at number 6 on Rue Bruyère. Christine and Leah devoted themselves diligently to their responsibilities and during the early period were treated with respect and dignity. Their wages conformed to the established standards of the profession, they were permitted to eat the same meals prepared for the Lancelin family, and they occupied a room equipped with 2 single beds, a heating system, and access to a balcony. The Lancelins felt genuinely satisfied and proud of their devoted employees, who became objects of envy among other French families belonging to high society. Deprived of a positive maternal figure throughout their lives, Christine and Leah developed deep affection for Madame Lancelin, referring to her affectionately as Mother. In contrast, Clemence was mentioned only as that woman without any sign of affection. There are reports that Madame Lancelin even went so far as to contact Clemence directly to inform her that Christine and Leah would keep their own wages from that point forward, ceasing the transfer of funds to their mother's household. This could have represented a genuinely positive new beginning for the sisters, who were finally placed in an environment where they were valued and respected. And for a considerable period, that was precisely what seemed to occur. However, the situation began to change dramatically in 1932. During this time, Léonie descended into a severe depression that completely altered her personality and behavior. The transformation was radical. From a warm and maternal figure to Christine and Leah, she became a cold and distant employer who chose to communicate with her servants exclusively through written notes. Léonie grew progressively more critical and demanding regarding the sisters' work. Reports circulated that she meticulously inspected surfaces using a white glove to detect even the slightest trace of dust or imperfection. Eventually, matters deteriorated to such an extent that Léonie began to shout violently at the sisters whenever she identified a task performed inadequately, and the relationship between employer and employees deteriorated even further when she began to physically assault them. The woman who had become an almost maternal figure to the young women now reprimanded them brutally. If they failed to complete their domestic duties according to her exacting standards, the sisters were pushed against the walls of the residence. This particular form of abuse has a devastating impact on any individual. However, considering the profoundly traumatic background of the Papin sisters, marked by neglect and violence from early childhood, the situation became exponentially more severe. It was simply a matter of time before the accumulated tension reached a critical breaking point. On Thursday, February 2, 1933, that was precisely what happened. The day began in an apparently ordinary way, with Christine, then 27 years old, and Leah, 21, occupied with their usual household duties and chores. Léonie and Geneviève had gone out to do some shopping. The family planned to have dinner later that evening with a relative of Renee who lived nearby. The sisters may have felt relieved to carry out their tasks without the constantly critical and judgmental gaze of Madame Lancelin weighing on them. One of Christine's assigned responsibilities that day was to iron the Lancelin family's clothes. A faulty iron had previously prevented her from tackling the accumulated pile of garments, but that very morning she had picked up the appliance after it had been repaired by a local electrician. Now that the equipment was working again, she began her task. However, when she plugged it in and turned it on, the iron immediately blew a fuse, plunging the entire Lancelin residence into complete darkness. Christine and Leah concluded that the Lancelins would not be returning home so early, so the blown fuse could safely wait until the following morning to be replaced and repaired. Unfortunately, Léonie and Geneviève decided to stop by the house briefly on their way to the dinner engagement. That seemingly innocent decision would have absolutely fatal consequences. Christine tried to explain in detail what had happened to Madame Lancelin, but instead of showing understanding or patience, Léonie reacted with intense fury, as she had done countless times before. The argument quickly escalated until Christine completely lost control, grabbed a heavy object, and struck Léonie violently with it. That act marked the point of no return, and all the anger that had built up in the sisters over years of abuse and humiliation was then unleashed in the most vile and brutal way imaginable. While Christine attacked Léonie, Geneviève bravely intervened in an attempt to defend her mother. She pulled Christine away from Léonie, and the two began to fight fiercely. As Léonie lay injured and collapsed on the floor, Christine shouted a terrible order to her sister: "Smash her head against the ground and tear out her eyes." The always obedient and submissive Leah carried out her sister's instructions without hesitation, brutally tearing out Léonie's eyes with her bare hands, while Christine committed the same horrifying act on Geneviève. Now blind and experiencing absolutely unimaginable agony, Léonie and Geneviève were completely helpless and at the mercy of their attackers. But the sisters' fury had not yet been satisfied. Christine ran to the kitchen to fetch additional implements, including a sharp knife and a hammer to use against the already severely injured Lancelins. The frenzied attack carried out by the sisters lasted for more than half an hour, continuing long after Léonie and Geneviève had already died. The Papin sisters took turns wielding their weapons, brutalizing the bodies in unimaginable ways, stopping only when physical exhaustion finally overcame them. When they had finished their terrible acts, instead of hastily fleeing the crime scene, both calmly locked the front door of the Lancelin residence, removed their clothes completely soaked in blood, and quietly withdrew to their bedroom. At 7 o'clock in the evening, René returned home and found the entire house plunged into total darkness. Assuming that his wife and daughter had already left for the planned dinner, he went to his relative's house as well. He quickly discovered that they were not there, which left him deeply perplexed and concerned. Upon returning to his own home, he found the front door locked, which was unusual. Mr. Lancelin immediately contacted the police, who forced their way into the building. Upon entering the residence, the officers made a macabre discovery on the second floor, the completely unrecognizable remains of Léonie and Geneviève. Blood and viscera covered the hallway entirely. On the staircase leading to the upper floor of the house, a single human eye lay alone. At first, investigators feared that the two domestic servants had suffered the same horrific fate. The police went to the sisters' bedroom, but found it locked from the inside. A locksmith was urgently summoned, and when he managed to open the door, officers reportedly found Christine and Leah lying closely embraced and completely naked on the bed. When questioned by the authorities, the Papin sisters immediately confessed to committing the murders, but claimed that they had acted in self-defense. Christine emphatically stated, "It was her or us." Surprisingly, despite the absolutely incomprehensible cruelty displayed in the commission of the crime, significant segments of the French public expressed sympathy for the Papin sisters. As news of the brutal murder spread throughout France, the deaths of Madame Léonie Lancelin and her daughter Geneviève were interpreted by many as the direct result of class struggle between rich and poor, between abusive employers and exploited employees. Even prominent and respected intellectuals such as Jean-Paul Sartre, Simone de Beauvoir, and Jean Genet publicly described the incident as an illustrative example of class struggle. During the subsequent trial, the strange and intensely codependent bond between the two sisters became evident to everyone present. Both remained silent and completely impassive throughout nearly the entire legal proceeding. Christine appeared almost to fall asleep during the hearings. Meanwhile, Leah kept her gaze fixed on nothingness until her name was specifically mentioned. The two maintained an exceptionally close and symbiotic relationship, but Christine was unquestionably the dominant leader, and Leah obediently followed every instruction her older sister gave her. It was also revealed during the trial that the sisters had managed to save 23,000 francs over the years, equivalent to approximately $22,000 in today's currency. This amounted to about 4 times their combined annual income. Apparently, the women spent virtually no money on anything beyond basic necessities. They did not allow themselves any treats or luxuries, did not attend theatrical or film performances, and did not travel on their days off. Instead, they spent absolutely all their free time exclusively in each other's company, isolated from the rest of the world. Because they had openly confessed to the crime, the defense vigorously argued that the sisters were legally insane and should not be held fully responsible for their actions. They began to extensively document the family's troubled history, including an uncle who had committed suicide, an extremely violent grandfather, and a cousin who had died in a psychiatric hospital. Naturally, the deeply abusive and traumatic upbringing that Christine and Leah had endured was presented as evidence. It was also reported that the girl's mother had become a religious mystic whose practices bordered on complete hysteria. Psychological experts would later argue that the sisters suffered from a psychiatric condition known as folie à deux, or shared psychosis. Individuals affected by this condition typically behave in a paranoid manner, display excessive fear and distrust of others, and may become defensive and irritable when confronted. The dominant person in the relationship, in this case Christine, is unaware that she is harming or negatively influencing the other person. However, despite the demonstrably troubled family background and the very evident signs of severe mental illness, especially manifested by Christine, the jury ultimately found both sisters mentally competent and guilty of the murders. Because it was firmly believed that Leah had participated in the killings solely under the dominant influence of her older sister, she received a more lenient sentence, 10 years of hard labor. Christine, however, was initially sentenced to death by guillotine, but her sentence was later commuted to life imprisonment. When she was physically separated from her sister in prison, Christine reportedly experienced a violent outburst of rage and desperately demanded to be reunited with Leah. When she finally calmed down after hours of agitation, she reportedly told a prison guard, "In some future life, I believe I will be Leah's husband." Discussions and debates about the true nature of Christine and Leah's relationship have continued from that time to the present day. Some scholars and observers believe the two maintained a sexual relationship of an incestuous nature. Others argue that the sisters were deeply attached to one another simply because of their family ties and the shared traumatic childhood that created a pathological emotional dependence. In any case, after being separated from Leah in prison, Christine's physical and mental health began to deteriorate at an alarming rate. She experienced a severe psychotic episode in July 1933, during which she attempted to tear out her own eyes, mirroring what she had done to her victims. After her repeated appeals and pleas to see Leah received no positive response from the authorities, Christine completely stopped eating. As a direct result of this self-imposed hunger strike, she died of cachexia, or extreme debilitating wasting, on May 18, 1937. Leah served 8 years of her prison sentence before being released. Presumably, she continued working as a domestic servant under a completely false identity to avoid being recognized. Without her sister by her side, Leah lived the remainder of her life without any other notable or disturbing incidents.